Alright, so we're doing a bit of an update video here. So they changed the setup on us. I knew the other setup felt kind of off, and boy, this new setup is incredible compared to the old one. It drives loose for the whole run if you do it correctly. So I'm going to shut up and let you watch this qualifying lap, and we'll go from there. Alright, so we're one taking everything right now, so I want to show you a couple things before we move on to the race, because honestly, for the most part, it's the same qualifying lap with a slightly different feel. So I'm still going to go for the half arc into the corner like I did in the original, and you're going to notice that I don't use quite as much brake to get to the bottom, because it's naturally a lot looser. So when I pick up the throttle, instead of being like tight and having to force the car towards the white line, it naturally gets loose. So instead of roasting your right front here, which doesn't really matter in qualifying, and having to use a lot of throttle control in that regard, now we're using throttle control to keep our rears under us. But you see, I open up the car real early, and this is so that I don't slide the rears. So you see that I'm kind of taking a really weird angle, and this might be the same as the first video too, but I might not have explained it as well. Conventional thinking is you want to shortcut the exit, but shortcutting the exit does nothing if you lose your rear tires and they start sliding and you lose your momentum. So you prioritize momentum over shortcutting, and that's what I do here. I get really loose, but I actually don't lose any momentum. So that was a really good corner. And then going into 3 here, you're going to notice the 3 and 4 on cold tires, cold being like first 3 laps or so, are going to be a lot harder to deal with, a lot looser than the old setup was. So I'm blipping out at least a third here, and this is necessary. You cannot really full throttle this unless you're absolutely insane. So you see, I have to even blip the throttle a little bit in the middle of the corner too, because you just can't really flat out this corner with how loose this setup is. And that's not a bad thing, that's a great thing for the race, but for qualifying it makes it more difficult here. So really it's the same lines with a slightly different feeling, and you're going to find that it helps you a lot in 1 and 2, and you're going to find it makes your life more difficult in 3 and 4. And then after all of that, I come across and we grab the pole with a 6.55. I think the time I had for the last video was almost the same, maybe a couple thousandths off, but it kind of goes to show for qualifying, the ceiling on the setup is probably higher because of being able to control that loose condition in 3 and 4, but it's definitely a little more difficult to execute. So anyways, moving on to the race, it was actually a very interesting one. We actually ended up winning this race, and it went a little different than I thought it would, honestly. So we're gonna see that I got out to a really good jump here, so I was able to give myself quite a buffer. So again, we were going with the 2 different lines here, but with switched now. I'm now taking that bottom right rear saving line, and Michael here, friend of the Discord server as well, is now taking the big arc line. And well, it proved a couple things here, is that neither of these actually work that well. If anything, my line worked the best. I mean, I did come out with the W, but if we look a little bit farther back, we have a guy who saved even more tires than both of us, and so he did this by doing a hybrid line. He's not arcing it as much as Michael, and he's not dive bombing it as much as I am. He's doing a bit of a hybrid line, and this kind of showed in the tires, because look at the difference here. So Michael ended up on 66.70. I ended up on 66.64. And this is because Michael burned off his right front really early and kind of slowed down in the middle of the run because of this. I was struggling on late run, but not to the point of like giving up tons of time, because my right rear was getting a little bit overworn. But if we look, I would assume he didn't say, but I would assume that Austin up here probably ended with at least 70 on the right rear and maybe 68 on the right front, if I had to guess. And he did that by doing a bit of a hybrid line between us two. So he was doing a quote-unquote big arc, and you can see he slid a bit, so maybe his tire management wasn't as perfect as it could be. But his line, the hybrid line, in this scenario actually worked out better. And I kind of felt like I was executing my line on a pretty high level. I wasn't reaching all the way to the bottom a lot, but like on this corner per se, this is exactly what I want to do. But it would start to compound, because if you approach turn 1 and 2 in a way that heats up your right rear slightly, which is what I was doing, and I was doing that intentionally. But if you think about it, if 3 and 4 is also loose, and that heats up your right rear because of that, then they start compounding on each other. Whereas if you start attacking one corner that puts heat in your right front and one corner that puts heat in your right rear, then it kind of balances it out and gives your tires a little bit of a break in between when they're being asked to do the work. So that made my life a little bit difficult. Austin ended up closing in on me. I think it was probably 2 seconds at one point. But we ended up gapping the rest of the cars by at least 4 seconds because of how much they were battling for one. And then the other, I just think that the big arc line still roasts your right front too much for the middle of the run. So that's a couple of things to look at, and we'll look at a little bit more. You can see at about lap 10, they really stayed on my bumper. And then once they start battling, or Michael misses one corner, and that kind of causes them to start battling, and that kind of allows me to get away. But you can see that maybe it was because of the battling, and maybe it was because of the right front usage that I slowly started getting away, and Austin was able to kind of make quick work out of both of them eventually. So yeah, he passed both of them in the span of about 2 laps. And this was on lap 14, so the tire difference was already that big on lap 14 because Austin wasn't pushing his right front at all. So the advantage that he gained over them was not wearing the right front as much, and the advantage he gained over me was keeping better tabs on his right rear. And it could have to do with a little bit in 3 and 4, but I think also 1 and 2, he was just managing it a little better than I was. You can see he's really patient on it, making a later apex. I was probably apexing a little too early, so when I get back on the throttle too early, that asks my right rear to be do all the work for 2/3 of the corner pretty much. Whereas if you apex late, you're asking your right rear to do the work for 1/3 of the corner, if that makes sense. So think about the tire that you want to manage, and think about ways that you can do that. So if you want to manage the right front, you do this dive bomb line, but if you want to manage your right rear at the same time, you do the dive bomb line but apex later. And it might be slower in the short term, but in the long term, your tires have less heat and less wear in them because you ask them to do less of a job. So honestly, there wasn't that crazy of a race from a viewer standpoint, but man, when he was catching me, I had to drive my butt off because of my right rear disadvantage. I was just getting loose all over the place for the final 5, but honestly, I don't think he would have been able to pass me as long as I hit my good lines, because he was maybe half a tenth better than me at most. And if I'm just hitting my marks, you really can't do much with half a tenth better lap times unless I make a mistake. So with track position here, as long as you're mistake free, as long as you're running close to your capabilities without any mental errors and all that, you can kind of hold them off. And I was kind of proud that I did, because I showed a couple times earlier this year that I wasn't able to do that. And yeah, it wasn't the SOF race, but this was still about a 3100 strength of field, so it was still a good race to win. Not going to be using these points though, but the points championship I'm going to start keeping an eye on. It's getting kind of close up there. I'll keep you guys updated next video for that, or the next Arca video, because I think that'll be pretty cool. But yeah, we'll get to the last lap here. He's just kind of going for it all, and I respect it, but honestly in this position, if I hit my marks like I'm supposed to, there's just nothing you can do. He's just trying to build a huge run, but this is always going to get too loose. And basically with that, we get the dub. So a good win and a good size strength of field here with good competition. Shout out to Truck Series driver Dean Thompson had a very good run going, hard battling with Michael there. Looked like a lot of fun. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all on the track.